In this video, I want to present my ideas on how we might extend Gordon's music learning theory. In developing my thesis, I will present ideas about phonics, about whole language sight words, about fractals, and geometric patterns, and how all of these play into rhythmic understanding and how we approach reading of rhythms. When we get to the point when children are reading rhythms, symbolic association, how all of these things come to bear on whether and how quickly children can read. To begin with, let's review how reading is approached in language arts. We have three basic ways of reading, and research tells us that it's a combination of these three that help most children develop the skill and capability of reading words. There's the phonic approach, sounding out words. There are sight words, where, such as the word stop, there's the word stop on a stop sign everywhere, and so that's one of those first sight words. Another one would be the word of is a sight word. The letter A as in a book, that's a sight word, and so on and so on. The other is whole language, and in the 80s whole language was the rage. Everyone was on board with whole language, and phonics sort of fell off into the abyss. And then we found that children could not read as well as they had in the past, and so there was a rebirth, so to speak, a renaissance of phonics. Come to find out, it's a combination of all three of these. How do all of these approaches to reading words apply to us? Phonics is identifying a letter. Sight words are what I would consider much of what Gordon advocates. There is a rhythm, yum pa pa bum bum ba, and you play around with that in a million different ways in your mind, and eventually when you see that, you associate yum pa pa bum 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 with what's on the page. That would be sight words. Whole language is going to take a musical phrase. Whole language is going to be the entire musical idea, which is more than ba, which is more than yum pa pa bum bum bum. It's more yum pa pa bum 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 ba ba bum bum ba da yum pa pa bum. That's a musical idea that can be recognized, even though you can still recognize yum pa pa bum 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 is simply a word, and whole language is the entire sentence, so to speak. How does this work with, or how does this relate to mathematics? Let's find out. In early mathematics experiences, children are taught patterns. Patterns such as the one in front of you. A circle, a triangle, a circle. That is a pattern of shapes. Later on, they will recognize patterns of letters or patterns of numbers. It's the pattern that is important. And it might be a pattern of colors. There are all sorts of patterns. If we take this idea of pattern as shape and move it into a musical context, it's going to be similar to quarter, half, quarter. That is an ABA pattern. If there was a one-to-one correspondence between patterns in mathematics and patterns in music, that's what a musical pattern would look like. And we know that that is not a musical pattern in the sense of a quarter note, a half note, a quarter note. All of those together create a pattern. Another thing we do that is quite interesting is we use icons to represent different note values, such as the one in front of you, which is yum ba ba bum bum bum. And we might say that, as I presented here, the 8th note is a star, the 16th notes are triangles, and so on. That would be an iconic representation of the notes in front of you before you get to the actual notation. And we often do this in the classroom. What Gordon suggests at the symbolic association level is that the entire pattern, yum ba ba bum bum bum, should be conceived of as an entire unit, a word, such as the word dragons. It is a word. We could phonetically say D, R, dr, a, g, a, n, z, and that doesn't make musical sense. Music happens in time. When we're reading a word, it doesn't have to be bound by time. And yet, if we take time away from a rhythm, it ceases to be that rhythm. Yum ba ba bum 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 could be T, tear, re, T, T, T. I said it correctly, and it's not a rhythm. It's simply syllables. It's a mnemonic without music. And we've all heard that, and we've all encountered that, no doubt. And on one of the pages in his textbook, he gives a chart of all the rhythms that are in 90% of the music that is written. Certainly it could be augmented, or it could be in diminution, reduced in size, but proportionately, it's always the same. For example, it could be yum ba ba bum bum bum. That is the same as yum bum 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 bum. It has the same overall feel at a much slower rate. It's essentially the same rhythm, just slower. And when Gordon talks about ENRHYTHMIC, as in enharmonic, the equivalent of enharmonic in a rhythm, that's what he's talking about. Let's move to this idea of whole language. Whole language in music. How might that look? How might that sound? Whole language is going to be the entire musical phrase. I haven't conducted all the research, but I'm gathering data about how phrases are rhythmically put together in grade 1 band literature. My thesis is that some of the same musical ideas are used throughout most of the early music we provide children. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, we're going to present a certain stock set of rhythms, and I will call that the grade 1 language. It will have core elements to it with slight variations, and when children can apprehend, can associate at sight, oh, there's this sentence, then they'll be able to read phrases, 8-bar phrases at sight rather than note to note or beat to beat. When they can associate an entire musical idea, yum ba ba bum 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 ba ba bum bum ba ya yum ba ba bum, that could be the same as yum ba 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 yum ba 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 yum ba ba bum bum ba 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 bum. Could be similar to Yum ba ba bum 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 ba ba bum bum ba ya ba 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 bum bum bum. It has that same feel to it, and so children are going to associate that feel, that movement, to each new rhythm they see. A problem with patterns in music is that they are not patterns in math. And I will present a harmonic example here, which is a little easier to understand. Here is a simple 1-1-5-1 harmonic progression that is used in many, many early childhood songs, and we take those songs and give them to children to transpose or transfer to the recorder and or to barred instruments, many other areas. Bum, 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 bum. There it is, one beat per measure, one bum per measure. One more time. Bum, 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 bum. And then that repeats. It's a 4-bar phrase, and we can hear that because we have been conditioned, we have been acculturated to that 4-bar phrase as the basic unit of music. Children do not think of it that way. Children think of it as bum, 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 bum. Oh, okay, so there's 2 C's and a G. Oh, 2 C's and a G. So what was yum, bum, bum, bum now becomes yum, bum, 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 bum. 1, 2, 1 C, 2 C, 1 G, 1 C, 2 C, 1 G, whatever it is, it's a tongue twister. They will play that because they're trying to remember note to note to note without recognizing the big pattern. And that's the issue with most reading of music, is that they're not associating sound or sight with sound. They're simply trying to decode. And that's one of the major arguments Gordon makes. And it's certainly a major source of frustration for many, many music professionals. So let's tie this idea of pattern in mathematics with the idea of pattern in music. We have 2 basic ways of constructing musical patterns. Way A and way B. The first is 2 similar phrases, 2 similar patterns played back to back, a contrasting pattern noted here in blue, and then a variant of the first pattern as a coda, or not a coda, but as a cadence. So that darker shade of orange is now a cadential figure. The other way is 3 similar patterns with a cadence, a cadential pattern. There are many other variations, but these are basic types. And if we can start with 2 basic types, then we can move on from there. If children can understand the musical logic behind these 2 ways of constructing musical phrases, they will be able to infer others. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, we have these 2. If we're taking this and putting notes on it, it would, for example, be what is in front of us now. Pattern A, or the first part of this pattern, is yum pa pa bum bum. It's repeated. Yum pa pa bum bum. There is a contrasting section, bum bum, and then a variant of the first, yum pa pa bum. Or 99% of the time, cadences end on a strong beat, or a beat. Then you have to have the cadence end on a strong beat or a downbeat. Yum pa pa bum pa yum pa pa bum 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 yum pa pa bum. And yet we know that that isn't enough. Yum pa pa bum 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 pa pa bum 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 yum pa pa bum isn't long enough to be a song. So what we're going to do is we're going to extend. This is where fractals come into play. Now we're going to extend that idea of AABA in the smaller phrase to a larger unit. Yum pa pa bum 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 pa pa bum 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 yum pa pa bum bum pa pa bum 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 pa pa bum 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 yum pa pa bum pa pa bum pa pa bum pa pa bum bum yum pa bum pa pa bum pa pa bum bum yum pa pa bum bum yum pa pa bum 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 yum pa pa bum. That is an entire song, something that we could hear as, oh, that is a musical whole. The musical whole is 16 bars long. And we have used that smaller pattern idea of AABA. Let's turn our attention now to this idea of fractals. I've mentioned it early on, and what you see in front of you are two geometric examples of what fractals are. Fractals are a reoccurring pattern at a smaller and smaller scale, level. Fractals are proportional. As you can see in both examples in front of you, the same basic shape is used at ever smaller and more refined levels. If you took a magnifying glass, you would see that it's the same shape, just smaller and smaller and smaller. Recently, Daniel Levitin from McGill University in Canada conducted some research that supports the notion that music, Western art music, is organized around fractals. The rhythm is organized around fractals, basic small units. And if we think about motivic development, that was very prevalent in Romantic music and beyond, you will notice that there are many unifying rhythms. Composers augment those rhythms. They use diminution, stretto, all of those devices to make something similar sound different. And that's one of the things about music that makes it so wonderful, is that these unifying devices of rhythm, in this case, help us to predict what's going to happen. And then a little variation to keep our interest, and then back to predictableness. And that's what we need to have children clue into, recognize, associate at the whole language level. The rhythms that they are trying to associate with the sounds that they've already heard are nothing new. They're all the same, just in different meters, just in different note values, but they're the same thing. So it's that Gordon's idea of symbolic association at the word level magnified to a sentence, a whole language sentence, as it were. You might ask yourself, what's a fractal? I have two examples here. The first, the note, is not a fractal. It is nothing. The note is simply a note. You have to have more than that. And yum pa pa bum bum bum, that's nice, dragon, but dragon without something around it is meaningless. A pattern, which could be a fractal, and we'll find out that it in fact is a fractal, doesn't stand on its own. It must be part of something bigger. And that's what this video is about, is understanding the bigness of what's going on. So how do fractals, which is taking exponential growth, geometric growth, and reducing it down to smaller and smaller and smaller sizes, how does that relate to exponential growth, which is going the opposite way? Here, this is how. The beauty of music is that it is logical. It is predictable and logical. We can't have nothing, so we have to have one. We have to have one of something. If we have one measure, well, we can't really have one measure, because if we have one measure, it needs to be balanced by two. Gordon's going to say this. Many other people have said this as well, Leonard Bernstein, among others. So now that we have two, well, we can't really have two, because if we have two, we have to have four, because the other two balance the first. But we really can't have four, because those four have to be balanced by another four, which is 8, 16, 32, 64, and so on. It's interesting, most pop songs are in 32-bar form. Coincidental? Maybe. Interesting? Definitely. If we buy into this idea of exponential growth, that something must be paired with something else, and most songs are 32 bars or 16, then the whole language unit of analysis, as someone in the research sciences would say, the unit of analysis or the unit of instruction is going to be 8 bars. You're going to present 8 bars in a whole language way. 8 bars. An entire idea. No less than 4, 8 would be optimal. Yum pa pa bum 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 pa pa bum 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 yum pa pa bum yum pa pa bum 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 pa pa bum pa bum ba yum pa pa bum. It has to be divided in half, and each half needs to mirror the other half. Maybe a different cadence at the end to notate that it is the end. So it could be yum pa pa bum pa yum pa pa bum pum bum bum yum pa 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 yum pa pa bum pum bum pa pa bum 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 ba 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 bum. Vocal inflection, change of rhythm, highlights, announces, wait a minute, cadence, end. One of Gordon's ideas about rhythm that I'm taking to heart recently is the idea of ENRHYTHMIC notation. The sound of yum pa pa bum bum yum pa pa bum 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 yum pa pa bum is, let's say, truth. That is truth as far as a rhythm goes. Now we can take truth and we can say it faster or we can say it slower, but it's still truth. Or we could put it in a different meter. So each one of these 4 rhythms you see in front of you is, if you analyze it, is the same. They're all the same. The last one, Yum ba ba bum 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 ba ba bum 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 yum ba ba bum. Or you could say the last one much slower. And as I have here at the top of the page, you want to present rhythms in as many different variations as you can and play those at varying tempo, varying tempi. Play familiar rhythms at varying tempos, notated in varying ways, so that children understand that they can associate this with that. So at long last, what can you do? You can do quite a lot. Above all, let children know that the patterns in music are not the same as the patterns in geometry. And to try and make that connection may be leading children up for, or setting them up for failure. The patterns of music are much more complex than the patterns in geometry, at least at the elementary level. When you're creating musical patterns or asking children to create musical patterns early on, make sure that the pattern length is at least 4 bars long. Having them create a pattern of 2 beats doesn't give them the breadth of what the feeling of a 4-bar or an 8-measure melodic idea is. One of the things that Gordon talks about repeatedly is the fact that rhythm is a feeling, not a counting. They need to feel the space, and this is something he talks about. They need to feel the space of what 4 bars is, what 8 bars is. It's not numbers, it's temporal distance. So have students create big phrases. And if most of them turn out to be silence, there you go. Let it be silence. But there must be a longer phrase. The idea also, if music is a language, should we endeavor to get children to communicate something more than a word? Blue is not an idea, it is a word. And if we want children to communicate through words, it has to be more than blue. Similarly, it has to be a musical idea, has to be more than ba-ba-ba. That's a great start, but it is not enough. Stress the importance of cadence. Cadence is the thing that separates one clause from another clause. Cadences are like commas or semicolons or exclamation points. They separate things for us and they keep ideas together. And the cadences could be a rhythmic idea or a harmonic idea. And sometimes it's the harmonic cadence, not the rhythmic cadence, that defines it. So that defines the musical idea. Therefore, this complicates our life in that we need to be cognizant of the harmonic structure of a song we're singing as we're trying to help them understand phrase length. If it will help, if it will help, try to remember that a phonic approach or phonemic awareness, phonics approach to reading music is the individual letter. Every good boy does fine. All cows eat grass. All of that mess. Nice but not enough. Sight words would be a small pattern of a measure. Yum pa pa bum. Or yum pa bum pa pa bum bum. That would be a pattern, a sight word. Being able to recognize yum pa bum pa pa bum bum at sight. Whole language is going to be 8 or 16 bars. The big enchilada. Remember back at the beginning of this video, I mentioned that research in language arts suggests that it is a combination of whole language experiences, sight word experiences, and phonics. Even though I'm sort of discounting phonics in this paradigm, but it takes all three to build a better reader. So when we are approaching reading notation or associating printed music with sound, we need to use a combination of all three, not just one.